All right, here we are with number 9. I think this is a great visual problem-solving problem, and it really helps practice the fundamentals, the fundamentals of comparing graphs and getting and using process of elimination. So here it says we have 6 students that sat tests in mathematics, English, and science. Their scores in English and science were plotted against their scores for mathematics, but they made a mistake and they didn't identify which scores were science and which were English. Now in part A says they want us to know how many students obtained a higher score in mathematics than they did in English. State the scores in these two subjects for each of these students. So we can worry about that in a second, but we don't know what math and science scores correspond with the math scores. However, fortunately, there is a way for us to do that. So we know that there's 6 students, so we can make a little chart here. Okay, we know we have math, English, and science. And like I said, this is going to be a great process of elimination problem here. So it's easy enough to figure out the English and science scores because they're already on here. So the person who got a 2 on the English test got an 8 on the science. Someone who got a 3, where there were 2 people that got 3s on the English, 3, 3, and those people got a 5 and a 9 respectively on science. Person 4 got a 6 on English and coincidentally a 6 on science. And then there were 2 people that scored 7s on English. One of them scored a 2, one of them scored a 3. Okay, now the difficulty is, how am I supposed to get math scores from all of this random stuff, especially when we have a bunch of 3s on the board, a bunch of 2s and 7s, and we're actually going to be using that to our advantage here, because while there's a bunch of duplicates, there are some that only appear once. So those would be 8 only appears once, 5, 9, and I guess we can consider 6 as well, but 6 is a special case. So we can go to the chart using these numbers, find out the math scores, and then we are only left with 2 more that we need to figure out. So the person that scored an 8 on either English or science happened to have gotten a 1 on mathematics. The person who scored a 5 on one of these, because if you'll notice there's no other dots on 5, there's only one person that scored a 5, they had a 2 on mathematics. All right. Same thing with 9. If we move up here, that person scored a 4. And then the 6, there's only one 6 over here, that person scored a 7. Okay, so if you're not okay with what we did up to this point, you need to pause the video now and make sure you get it, because we are going to continue from here to finish up, but there are 2 distinct parts here. This first one was using process of elimination for the ones that are unique. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the fact that we knew there were duplicates to our advantage as well. So we have 2 7s here. If we look at the chart, we see that there's 2 7s here. One of them is going to be an 8. One of them is going to be a 9. We don't know which one is which. However, like we said, there are other duplicates. There's a 2 and a 3, just like there's another 3. There's 3s here, and there's 2s here. So if we look at the 2s first, or this 2 and this 2 rather, if we look at the 2s first, there's only 2 options. Either the person scored a 1 on mathematics, or they scored an 8. This person, we already determined, had to have scored a 1. Therefore, this person scored an 8. I'm sorry. Therefore, person 5 scored an 8 on math. The last one here, process of elimination, tells us the answer is going to be 9. However, if you wanted to do it the other way, we saw that 3 again has 2. They're the possible math scores for the people that on English and science had 3s were 2, 4, and 9. 2, 4, 9. Look at that. All right, so again, pause the video if you want to make sure, because again, there were 2 to 3 distinct portions or steps that we did here. So make sure, maybe rewind, whatever the case. I am going to move on to part B here because it's pretty simple. Explain why there are 11 dots rather than 12 in the first scatter plot. Because remember, there's supposed to be 12 here because there were 6 students that took the test. Each of them is going to have a science and math, or English and science dot in relation to the math scores. However, like we said, there was one student who had the same score for English and science, so that dot is only going to appear once because one dot on 6 for English, one dot on 6 for science happens to be the same place, and so that's why there's 11 instead of 12. And that's number 9.